Well, let's start by having you introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are and what you write, and we'll go from there.
Glogau Morgan as the author name, and I'm here in beautiful Central Virginia, living just outside of Shenandoah National Park, and I write primarily sci-fi, although the new novel's dystopian, and I'm really excited to be here today.
Shenandoah Park, you must get some great inspiration from that.
Oh, the beauty, but also the bears.
Yeah,
it is a nonstop battle.
Tell everybody a little bit about what you're experiencing and who, and what it means and why writing became such a great outlet for you.
I've been writing since I was 8. Binders full of stories about a singular character. And I thought, oh, one day I'll get around to putting her into a novel. And that never really happened. And in my 20s, I started to get sick. I started to get really, really, really sick. And by 30, I was practically disabled. I was still trying to work full time, but I couldn't. We were trying to figure out what was going on. And the same year I switched from teaching full time to substituting because it was becoming too much, I got the diagnosis of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome with dysautonomia. I then later found out I have what they call the trifecta. I have one of the other comorbidities, mild Chiari malformation. And going back to teaching full time became something that was never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard. I was writing a lot of poetry and songs and stuff, mostly out of anger, and had a couple of short stories catch people's attention. And that's when my friends and family started going, why don't you start trying to write the book? Why don't you try taking Dee's story and putting it into a book? So, okay, give it a shot. Got 40 pages in, hit a wall, didn't do so well. But that same time, I started having a series of dreams, night after night, 3 weeks in a row, totally different character, totally different story, incredibly vivid. And they were lingering with me day after day after day. So I started outlining them and jotting them down. And that's what ended up becoming the Midnight to Morning trilogy, which became such an amazing therapy for me. At first I was able to just sit down and start writing, but then what the damage that the Ehlers-Danlos does was becoming really apparent in my hands and arms. So then I started investigating adaptive equipment that I could use. And all 3 novels ended up getting written with adaptive equipment. And as my health continued to deteriorate, I started writing more and more and more and more. And I'll do past the time.
What, for people who don't know what Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is, can you kind of explain to them a little bit of a generic version of what it really entails and what it does to you?
It is a genetic disorder. The basics of it is your body is lacking enough collagen. I'm 40. I have the collagen levels of a 90-year-old. So it's usually about half of what you should have at that time in your life. And what that means is my organs are all just kind of like sagging, kind of out of place, talking about having to have certain ones pinned up. But the biggest thing is I dislocate my joints every day, all day long. Never stops. I bruise easy. I tear muscles easy. I've torn tendons easy. And you really just kind of need to like wrap me up in bubble wrap. But the other thing it does is you never just have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I think it would have been okay if it was just that. But then I got diagnosed with cascading autonomic failure with the dysautonomia as well. And that's what's made the doctors call it terminal, because between the 2 versions that I have, I'm not expected to live past 50s or 60s.
That must have been really hard to fathom at first, I would imagine. I mean, nobody knows their fate. Nobody knows, beyond today what's going to happen. But I mean, for somebody who has a prognosis of when this might all occur. Was it did that accelerate your thought process in I got to get this writing done, and how does that change how you approached the writing process? Did it change anything for you? Did you?
It did. I had already had the Ehlers-Danlos when I started writing Midnight to Morning's first book, and then that whole cascading into terminal thing happened right at the beginning of writing the second one, and it did inspire me to keep moving and to keep pushing forward with the writing, to not let this be the last books, to once again, I've got to get Dee's story out at some point. Don't know when. Still working on that. But it definitely inspired me to do that, to get my blog going. And then starting to reach out to others in the Ehlers-Danlos and dysautonomia community. So now I'm actually volunteering as an online mod for one of the major support groups. So it definitely has inspired me to do things that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise. It challenged me in a lot of ways to be like, well, you know what? Even if I make it to, like 60, like most Ehlers-Danlos patients with this particular grouping that I know of, they usually make it around 60, and then they just can't handle it anymore. I'm like, even if I make it that far, there's so many things I want to do, and there's so many things I've already gotten done, but there's so much more that I want to do. So I've been really pushing on to that. And then one of those things is to really get my books out.
Yeah. And so for you, almost being indie isn't a necessity. It wasn't a choice. It was, you had to do it because you had to get things done and get them out there. That being said, how do you think you benefit from this community? Is this community embraced what you do and who you are?
I'm actually a fairly newcomer to the actual indie author community. Midnight to Morning and Sunrise to Shadow. Well, Midnight to Morning had long been out. Sunrise to Shadows took a while to write just because I'd had surgery after surgery and issue after issue. When that came out, that's when I started finding groups like Brains to Books and the GoIndieNow stuff and the Indie Author magazine. I got an article published in there right after Sunrise to Shadows came out, and then just started getting asked into various indie author circles from there. And I've done a couple of articles now for various author groups, and even a presentation at one on how to write with adaptive equipment. So they've embraced that part of me, not just me as an indie author, but me as a disabled indie author. And that's been really cool. That's been a really great experience.
That's awesome. I want to talk. I mean, I don't want to focus solely on this. I mean, this is a big part of who you are, and you're so great about opening up and sharing with us about it and everything like that. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing that. I mean, it's an amazing journey you're on, and I applaud you. And I want to know about your process. How did this whole series develop for you? Was it something that you were going to write just one of, or did you always have in mind that this was going to be a series?
I knew from day one this was going to be a series because there was so much content in those dreams. It was ridiculous. When I sat down to start outlining everything I remembered, I ended up with 27 pages of bulleted outlines.
Wow.
And originally I was like, I could probably do 4 books out of this.
Yeah.
But then as I started writing it and changing a little bit here and modifying a little bit there and crossing things off, I was like, you know what? I think 4 would be monotonous with their story. So I want to see if I can cram it into 3. And I did. And that's when another indie author gave me the idea of taking the stuff that I didn't put on there and adding it to my blog page, which is where the Trio Unleashed came from. And I just added that to my blog a few days ago. And so it will be those main characters' continuing story. The stuff I didn't put in the book will show up there.
I the little bit I've experienced of your trilogy and the stuff I've read about it, it seems to me that Harley shares this sense of adventure with you.
Oh
Is
yeah.
that, and you are you how much of Harley have you designed for you to be within yourself? I mean, is she really a huge part of who you are, or has she become a huge part of who you are?
Both. Definitely both. When I first started the dreams, it was actually me.
Mm.
And then in the refugee camp scenes. And then somewhere along the way it switched over to it was this different character, and I was really happy about that. I definitely wasn't liking where any of that was going. But there is definitely a lot of her in me, and it wasn't necessarily intentional. There were some parts that were some things that were referenced in the camp. The whole empathic type of skills that she has.
Mhm.
Those kinds of things are definitely me, and her experiences are like some of the things that I've gone through. Um, but she has evolved into her own little beast there, and um, that nickname Bear fits her really well.
Nice. That's awesome. What within the world building process have you really enjoyed? Creating. What is it that keeps you coming back to this particular world and story that you love so much about?
Oh, I did something incredibly weird with the fourth book, the fourth, my new work in progress, because of this trilogy. Um, the world building itself, it's all, I saw it all in the dreams. So there really was very little that I modified.
Interesting.
Um, and I like the idea of just trying to think of what would our world look like if the USA was no longer a big power, because it has been pretty much nuked out. Um, where would the people go? How would that change the dynamic of the rest of the world? And that part of the world building was really, really cool for me. And like I was throwing ideas off of family members and off of my friend Alex. And my word, he was getting to be such a sounding board. Um, and so that part was really neat. And then in the third book, she's not in her timeline anymore. And that was where I got to get super creative. And I really enjoyed that process of twisting a little bit here and changing a little bit there. And what would this timeline be? What would it look like? Kind of thing. And then when I started writing my new work in progress, I realized I was writing the future timeline that it's mentioned in the first book, and I didn't even like consciously realize it until it was about 80 pages in.
Wow, that's awesome.
I was like, wait a minute, hang on a second. Did I mention something about that? I literally went back into book one and I was like, oh, I think I'm actually writing this timeline that's referenced.
So what you mentioned that you had this in mind the whole time, that the dream was very vivid. Did it give you starting and stop points from the first book to the second book to the second book to the third book, or were those things that you had to kind of navigate through as you were writing, and how did you approach that process? Because to me, that's always the fascinating thing about writing a series is knowing when to cliffhang and when to bring the next
Right.
book together. And so I'm kind of curious about that in terms, because you had it all laid out in one dream or series of dreams.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely got to do the whole plotter versus pantser thing, because there was very literal I was pantsering. Um, the first book I had to decide where to cut it off.
uh,
Because even at the end, it mentions how they're leading up into another mission, and it's like I need to find a cutoff point, or this is just going to keep going and going and going beyond the 400 500 pages here. Um, the second book, however, has a cliffhanger ending, and it was definitely where it was supposed to be. And then the third book, I just kind of had to reference that they just continue to go on like this until their years are up for serving, and they retire and they go on to eternity there.
I love the that you're doing. What did you teach, by the way? What was your main focus in teaching?
Everything. I've literally taught from elementary school to middle school language coach to high school earth science and environmental science. So I love teaching. Um, I actually got a special ed certification at one point, was doing that, purposely let it expire. But I started with elementary school, but the older I got, the more I started liking teenagers and started really like working with teenagers. And now I've got two of my former students who come visit me regularly and call me mom.
Mm.
And that's a pretty cool thing. You know,
Yeah.
a mom 2.0 to one of them is how he calls it. He's here every Sunday.
That's amazing. What you hear so many things about, and I have nieces and nephews younger, and I see this in them, and I see this in children of friends and things like that. I'm fascinated because I think the youth of today gets a bad rap, and I think I'm curious from your perspective, uh, what you see from them that has just been awe-inspiring, that has helped you kind of navigate your life, and what has it done for you? How has it enriched you?
They're already working with one hand tied behind their back. We've done a lot to mess it up so that they're already working handicapped.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, yeah, you get the things like, the kids who who I taught, they're all considered millennials.
Yeah.
They're all in their early 20s now, mid 20s. At least when I was teaching teenagers, they're creative, and they're really amazing and inspiring because they are trying to go out there and change the world with one hand tied behind their back. Um, no one's really taking them seriously, but a lot of them have so many good ideas and so much determination. Maybe once they can get into power, they can start changing things for the good. I don't know, but the kids I worked with were sure determined. One of the things I write on all the books that I signed is never stop dreaming. Um, and and then in the one I'm signing, the second one, I put make sure to follow those dreams.
Nice.
And this is a dream come true, being able to write and get the books out and start to get known a little bit. It's beyond anything I thought I could do. And being able to do it with an adaptive mouse and ring splints and voice to text software and an adaptive keyboard and everything else, you know, don't give up, because if I can do it with all of this stuff stacked against me, you can too.